It was summer of 2020, right in the thick of WWE's pandemic era, something that had never been witnessed in wrestling before. Wrestling as a sport and form of entertainment has evolved over time, but one thing has remained constant to this day. It's the fact that the crowd interaction is what makes it so special. But this was out of WWE's hands at the time. They somehow convinced the government of Florida that professional wrestling or sports entertainment was an essential service. As a result, they got to operate out of a select few venues while following the COVID-19 safety protocols. Right from the start, it turned into an opportunity for WWE to try something different. In the first and only WrestleMania to not have any fans in attendance, there were two cinematic matches. The first was the Boneyard match, which turned out to be The Undertaker's swan song, and the second was the Firefly Funhouse match between John Cena and Bray Wyatt. The Boneyard match in particular got a lot of praise for being an innovative way to work around not having a live audience. It prompted WWE to experiment with different concepts, and the most popular one apart from those two was the corporate Money in the Bank ladder match. That featured the men and women battling it out in the WWE headquarters, with both briefcases placed on the roof of the building. A few months later, WWE decided to experiment with a new concept for Raw. To say the concept failed to take off would be a bit generous. We're talking about the bizarre debacle that was Raw Underground. What was Raw Underground? It was something that couldn't even last 50 days. But in all seriousness, it appeared to be inspired at least partially by Josh Barnett's Bloodsport or the Michigan-based promotion Sanctuary Fight Club, depending on who you ask. It was reported that minus the lack of ring ropes, almost everything about Raw Underground mirrored the Sanctuary Fight Club. The SFC's catchphrase was even, "Join the Underground," so make of that what you will. It was WWE's version of an underground fight club, which makes sense because nobody spoke about it when it was done. Shane McMahon returned to WWE TV after almost a year away, a follow-up run where he turned into a tyrannical commissioner of SmackDown Live before Kevin Owens kicked him out. Shane was suddenly a good guy again, and he was the host of a series that he called Raw Underground. It took place in a raunchy warehouse setting with a big ring and no ropes. There was also junk lying around and dancing girls to give it some sort of a sleazy feel. Fun fact, Omos revealed on the Say Less with Kaz, Low-Key, and Rosie podcast that those girls were actually exotic dancers. The idea behind it was something that's called a worked shoot style in wrestling. It's meant to look like it's real, and wrestlers can definitely get a bit rough rather than protecting each other like they usually should, but the fact is that it's ultimately predetermined like regular wrestling matches. It was advertised as a no-holds-barred, anything-can-happen type of concept, except it wasn't like that at all. Shane would just stop the match after an opponent appeared to be knocked out or submitted. It was meant to be a launching pad for a few big guys like Omos. There were a lot of familiar names like Bobby Lashley, Dolph Ziggler, Shelton Benjamin, Eric from the Viking Raiders, as well as Braun Strowman. Eventually, we got to see names like Aleister Black, Kevin Owens, Apollo Crews, Cedric Alexander, Shayna Baszler, Nia Jax, and quite a few others. But WWE seemed intent on using it to pivot the 6'9" Dabba-Kato, who was previously known as Babatunde. When he got started, he slaughtered a few smaller guys who didn't even get the dignity of an introduction. Shane even advertised Dabba-Kato as being 7 foot tall when he wasn't. The only good thing about the Raw Underground is that it proved to be a launching pad for the Hurt Business. But it was more of a case that Hurt Business was going to succeed in the next few months anyways. The way it went down was kind of funny in hindsight. It coincided with the Retribution storyline as Bobby Lashley, MVP, and Shelton Benjamin concluded that Raw Underground must be the source of havoc being wreaked on Raw. So on the very same night that Raw Underground began, the Hurt Business took over the warehouse and insinuated that they were in charge now. When they were beating the crap out of all these people, one of the men happened to be Dio Madden, who was also eventually revealed to be in Retribution. Not exactly consistent storytelling. Shane McMahon, who was supposed to be the victim of a coup, just happily told them that they were welcome back whenever they wanted. What? They took over Raw Underground when it had only been on the air for a few minutes, so that wasn't very impactful at the time. In the second week, Omos, who was previously Akira Tozawa's big ninja, was revealed to be the bodyguard. Riddick Moss was featured, and then Brazilian superstar named Arturo Ruas was shown. In a pre-recorded, and what we have to emphasize, the pre-recorded part here, Ruas knocked his opponent out with a spin kick that missed by a mile. Shayna Baszler got a bit of a platform too by squashing multiple women in a row, including Ivy Nile, and was featured on multiple episodes. The criticism was instant and nobody seemed to buy the concept. With every passing week, it was clear as day that there was no actual plan in place. We could go on about the weird matches between superstars, the typical rewriting of Raw removing advertised matches, the absurd production quality, or even times when things just abruptly ended and cut to different segments, but you get the point. Wrestling veteran Jim Cornette on his podcast had a few very valid pieces of criticism against Raw Underground. He pointed out how for years WWE emphasized the entertainment aspect of their programming, making it clear that it's a scripted entertainment only to attempt a supposedly reality-based fight club and fail badly at it. Cornette also mentioned how laughable it was that Shane McMahon would stop fights when someone was out, while superstars have literally fallen off the Titantron onto a table on Raw and continued wrestling. What it seemed to be was a ratings grab to try and capitalize on the increasing popularity of MMA. Almost everything about the way this was handled was a debacle. Shane McMahon might be entertaining, but he was never suited to be a TV show host. The dancing girls were just completely unnecessary. WWE seemed to have forgotten that they were in the midst of pushing a women's revolution and that having exotic dancers on their television kinda contradicted that. In reality, all of this was just a response to declining ratings. It sums up how incredibly haywire the creative direction of WWE was at the time. Not everything was bad, but WWE was hurting in the ratings department. Considering how WWE's broadcast deals were financial lifelines during the pandemic that continued to make them more profitable than ever, it was a desperate attempt to catch the audience's attention. When looking at the timeline, it was also the time when people were at home, so they had all the time in the world to consume all sorts of different media. On one hand, it should have given WWE an advantage to swoop in more viewers than the previous few years, but in reality, they were competing with all kinds of different media. What Raw Underground represented was an extremely out-of-touch response. It's not difficult to see why WWE was so quick to pull the plug on this experiment. According to the Wrestling Observer newsletter, WWE's official reason for canceling Raw Underground was the fear that having too many extras would spread the coronavirus. It didn't help that it failed to capture viewership after a very brief boost to the third-hour ratings. The reason why WWE stopped doing cinematic matches as fun as a few of them were? Well, people don't tune into Raw, SmackDown, NXT, Dynamite, or any other wrestling show to watch a movie. They tune in to watch good old-fashioned wrestling and entertainment. When storylines get epic enough the way that the Bloodline saga has unfolded, fans organically dub them as cinema. But that's something that's earned. If WWE continued the cinematic matches, they likely would have hit a brick wall pretty quickly. But even as a product of its time, Raw Underground didn't really work. By all accounts, the entire concept seemed to be the brainchild of Shane McMahon. Speaking to Corey Graves on the After the Bell podcast, Shane said that it was an original concept inspired by the times of the Roman gladiators, Japanese combat sports, and MMA. The idea was to blend them all with WWE entertainment. There is some evidence that the overall concept wasn't so bad, and that it was more about the botched execution and the lack of time given to develop. Incidentally, the Raw Underground format found more success in NXT. The fact that it was a complete flop on Raw and not NXT was down to a few different factors. For one, NXT doesn't have anywhere close to the viewership that Raw does on a global scale. Secondly, NXT took a bit of a different approach to it. Being that they're in the position to experiment with different things without the wider audience criticizing them, it allowed for a few interesting adjustments. The inaugural NXT Underground match happened on June 26, 2023, and it's only been done once every few months. The live fan engagement made all the difference, but putting people with legitimate backgrounds in MMA and wrestling made for interesting viewing. Take the Lola Vice vs. Natalya match for example. In late April 2024, the former Bellator fighter took on the longtime veteran in Natalya and the match got raving reviews. There were two legitimately good competitors, and that seemed to be the key to having a realistic looking bout on WWE television. It also helped that the setting wasn't underground to the point where there was junk thrown around, and NXT Underground turned it into what Raw Underground was supposed to be. But this can't be a regular occurrence. Even if it appears on the main roster again, there needs to be a massive change to the original concept and upgrades to the NXT concept as well. But at least in the sphere of NXT, there seems to be some appetite for more underground matches in the future. Maybe we could see it evolve into an even bigger concept. With Raw going to Netflix and WWE set to fire on all cylinders, who knows if we could get a version of Underground that caters to a more adult audience. AJ Styles briefly spoke about how he felt WWE could have improved Raw Underground. His idea was to take inspiration from a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie where there were fight scenes in various settings like parking garages, tennis courts, swimming pools, etc. AJ Styles said that using different locations like bars, streets, and other settings would make it more entertaining, and we have to agree with that. The future is going to be interesting. Would you like to see a new take on the Underground concept? Let us know what you think in the comments below.